topic that they wanted to discuss, or I looked as usual on Wicked's Twitter and they're already discussing a topic I actually did on one of my other shows, but it's just too good a topic. So one that I think we need to do, there's two at the moment here, Wicked, and they're sort of in a way interconnected because they're about like being a pro and what it means to be a pro and stuff. Basically the two big topics that I want us to get into, and then we'll go beyond that, is one is this one where there was a thread that basically someone took a video, the LPL English Twitter account did, that shows what an average day for a pro is like. And whereas if you're an LCS pro, let's say it starts at, like, off the top of my head, I don't have the thread open now, but let's say their day starts at, I don't know, 1 p.m. and ends at, like, let's say like 11 p.m. or whatever, you know. So let's say it was like a 10-hour day or 11-hour day or something. The LPL version was like theirs was essentially like 12 hours of like real practice and other stuff built in, and, you know, they could end at like 4 a.m. or something ridiculous. And then the idea was like, if you looked into it, it's kind of like the old LCK ones back in the day where you look into it and you're like, how are they actually sleeping and doing these things? But you just realize that's just life if you're over there, right? It's all they do is play the game, basically. So that's one. And then the other one is that, kind of in line with this, actually, LCK themselves, this is fucking rich and amazing. They want to get a bunch of veterans back. They don't necessarily just want rookies. It turns out they even said, like, just essentially being mechanically good isn't good enough. And they're actually potentially going to ask some retired pros to come back because they need like captains and sort of like leadership figures. So let's start with the practice one, because this is a classic one that's been talked about a lot. But I have to say, one of the reasons why I don't find this as interesting on a lot of other talk shows when they do this one is I've noticed all Westerners come at it from the perspective of like their ideal practice environment, and they always want it to be like a fucking, almost like some politician speech, like, oh, and we will be sustainable and we will not allow people to burn out and we will appreciate their mental health. And listen, it all sounds great. That's why I say it's like a politician's speech. It sounds brilliant. But the problem I've noticed is no one's really ever come up with a solution at the end that lets you then say, and in doing so, I could still beat the LCK and the LPL. So at the moment, to me, the tough part about this discussion is you can talk all you want about the bad aspects, but if they are better, it's got to in some way be connected to the fact they practice the game a lot more, right? Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. Like, so the basic issue we have, like I said, is this. I mean, you just talked about it, right? The continuous talk about holistic approaches to the game, where we continuously go through cycles of like, hey, we should structure practice a bit differently. We should do this and that in order to make it more habitable for everyone and everything, so everyone can participate, everyone can compete, everyone can get to a certain level. But the reality is, you know, and I think that's what you just like, kind of talked about already, is that working hard goes a long way, and working harder than everyone else goes an even longer way. And we've seen these examples in the LPL. We've seen these examples in the LCK. We've seen these examples also over the years in EU and in A. The teams that worked the hardest in most cases actually were the winning teams. It wasn't the ones that were the most holistic, that were the most, let's say, sports psychology oriented. It was the ones that just pushed through the fatigue, the anger that you accumulate over the course of a year, and just push through. And that's what it is about, you know. And I think that's what people don't understand when it comes to these discussions. There's a certain baseline you have to reach. If you go below that and you call that holistic, that's not holistic. You're just underworking, and you basically will underperform because of it.
What do you think, Wicked?
So I think the problem is also people come at this angle of, oh, it's not healthy, they shouldn't do it, they don't want to do it. But there's a lot of people that do it, and they want to do it, right? Like an easy example would be to look at Tyler1 and XQC. If you look at XQC, he streamed for 4 years, 10 plus hours every single day on average, which means every single time he took a day break or something else, maybe his internet was down, that means he needed to make up for that time other days. So he probably streamed like 11 hours on average, right? The days he actually streamed. And he obviously looks somewhat unhealthy, right? He's not like fit or anything. But then you take Tyler1, who does a similar thing, streams all the time. He's extremely fit, he's looking good, and he's taking care of himself. So it is possible to do both. The problem is just you have to put in the hours. You have to put in that much practice because somebody else is going to do it if you don't do it. And at the end of the day, being the best in the world is not about being balanced. It's just about being the best. And that's the only thing that matters to them.
Yeah, I find there's so many angles you can go with on this topic, but like I say, to me at the moment, it always gets caught on that angle, like I say, that people are trying to make it. Well, the best way I can describe it is like this. As someone who in my own job, I've done the periods where you grind ridiculously. Like I had one period where I did like a Thorin's Thoughts video. Notice I didn't just say a video, like a Thorin's Thoughts video every day for something mental, like 90 plus days in a row. And I can tell you it is really hard. Like obviously there's the days where you don't feel like it, or you're ill, or something happens in the day that means you can't get on the internet. Like if you make yourself do it, it is brutal. Like, you will feel at the end, like, sort of mega exhausted. But I have to say, the problem is this. When I then later, like, optimized my, in this case, like, work instead of practice, I almost feel like I had to sort of brute force and do it the wrong way to know what to take from that to then do it more efficiently, you know. I don't think actually I could have sat down at the beginning and thought, well, I want to do loads of videos. So what's like the most perfectly efficient, like holistic method? I don't think I would have been able to do it. I think I almost had to like make the mistakes or learn the basics of doing it, just essentially just iterating the basic thing you currently do to then figure out how to do the whole like work smarter, etc. So I think part of the problem I have with this as well is I agree with the initial premise. If you could get done in 4 hours what takes the other guy 8 hours, yeah, it would obviously make more sense for everyone. The problem I've noticed is no one really has the solution of what that is, though. No one's really figured out, like for example, I don't think that if I go and watch the LPL and LCK teams, they're not doing the most efficient practice, but they're definitely not just banging their head against the wall. They're not just doing the same thing for 8 hours in a row. So I almost think it's actually a little bit kind of almost arrogant to assume that you can figure out how to do in less time what they're doing, because I actually think some of the teams don't really understand what those squads are doing. I mean, basically it ties into a discussion we had a few episodes back where you were talking amazing about how they changed the NA scrim blocks, where I think, isn't it like they do a best of 5 now or something like that, whereas before it was like 3 blocks or something?
I mean, they do 1 best of 3, 1 best of 3 usually, or they do, actually that's what it is. In EU, partially we did best of 5s, but they basically reduce it from like 8-10 games to basically 5 to 6 games, and most people actually cancel after 4 or 5. So
right,
it's a definite reduction, yeah.
But they are basically, as far as I know, yeah, by that, doing like an entire extra block in the Asian regions. And that's without, obviously, it goes out saying they can add in as much individual solo queue as they want. In fact, some of the stories back in the day, I have to say, were horrifying. Like, I've even told some of my friends who are Western pros, like, it might sound cool in an interview. I remember one of the ones that was really egregious was when Matter in season 4 did an interview, and he said, like, I practice all the time, but then when I go to bed, I see Heartsaw was still on his computer playing like for 3 It was just like, what? And he was even saying, like, when he calculated it, basically there was no way that guy could have been getting like 8 hours sleep. So that's another thing, actually. That's one other tangent I would add in. Another reason, in my opinion, you wouldn't actually want to, as a Westerner, do this kind of practice schedule if you can avoid it, is I've seen the people in Western sports, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, people like that, who did like the absurd amount of practice. And I can tell you, it's not at all, by the way, that they like wreck their health, because they understand their health is key to actually performing. What they do basically is what they give up is their personal life. They'll just tell you straight up, yeah, I just gave up having certain friends. I don't go to the party or the nightclub or whatever. I just go to the gym, I go home, and that's it. Basically, like, I think that's an area that people are really underestimating. A lot of Western pros, you can't tell them, like, yeah, by the way, just don't ever watch anime again. Yeah, no, stop watching sports. Like, just the game's all it is. But they don't get it. That is what, like, not all the Asian players, but the really elite ones are doing that. Like, I remember there was a story in StarCraft that one of the really great players called Fantasy, who played for Box's team, he once had an interview, right, where unironically, he wasn't trying to be cool by saying this. He said in the interview, effectively, I don't really have hobbies, I just play StarCraft. And they were like, what do you mean? And he was like, well, yeah, like, I don't watch TV shows, I don't watch, if I've got spare time, I just watch more games, or, I get someone to help me do a different type of practice. Like, I totally do not expect anyone to do that. But the problem is, if that's what the person who's winning does, you have to somehow acknowledge there's something to it, even if we don't know what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the arrogance part is really important. Like, when we think about like the traditional, like how we actually became better at the game, for example, even years past, like it was due to like that increased amount of workload, right? I remember in season 4, for example, obviously with TSM, we had a like 14-hour day when we were in Korea, 14 hours, like legitimately, like we scrimmed 8 hours, and then we had solo queue on top of it. That's an insane schedule. It made us really good. And if we think about every other year that came afterwards, like people that were at the top in the West even were just the hardest workers. They kept doing what they had to do, but they also got, like, I guess the exchange for that, which is basically like more monetary resource or more influence in the scene, whatever it is, depending on the situation, right? For example, with TSM, obviously you had more exposure. In other teams, you probably got more salary, right? Like in a turn. At least when that's given, when you have like that kind of like compensation for it, I think a lot of people are willing to put in the work. But right now, and I think that may actually be the biggest issue, is that there's like little to no incentive for a lot of people to actually work that hard, because they don't see quite like the impact their work has on the team. Or what I want to say is that like it is relatively undirected when they work harder than everyone else. It doesn't result in anything, because a lot of the players are just like stuck in teams where they potentially couldn't even reach anything because they didn't have from the very get-go, like a winning mindset in the team that was built into.
Do you think the whole team has to do like the practice, or like as you're saying, if one person does it, you think it just doesn't have that big an effect?
I mean, it could have. In some cases, it may have, but in a lot of cases, I just don't think it does. And I think it's more about like basically playing for your career and just being like, hey, I'm going to work harder than anyone else, and I'm going to get a better contract than anyone else next year, and that's what I'm going to end up. So, because a lot of these teams are not built in the way that they used to be built, right? I don't want to say in our area, but I guess it was in our era. It was that teams that were performing well, they got to go to Worlds, they got to go to events, they got to do stuff. And that was basically like our kind of like gift, that we got for working hard. But nowadays, what's the incentive for like the people on SK, for example, to work harder than anyone else? Like the only incentive is that you're like, hey man, I'm gonna get a good contract next year. I'm gonna be out of here. Fuck everyone else. That's basically the thought process that I think is happening right now. So it is not like how it is in the Korean culture and Chinese culture, where it's about listening to elders and kind of like the greater like I don't want to say good, but I guess the greater kind of like team aspect that is always in the forefront, because that's ingrained in the culture. It's relatively individualistic, which is fine given how the organizations are operating. I think that's where the key issue is lying, where I think if you're really good in Korea, if you're really good in China, it seems to me that you get like compensated a lot more fairly for what you're doing than if you're doing it here. Like I think in terms of like how you're seen within the team, how you're seen within the scene, I think when it comes to the Western scene, especially in Europe, I think on an individual scale, the only thing you're getting out of it is maybe next year they're going to get a better contract, but it's not the same in how it is in Korea and China, where you instantly get that recognition. You're going to be signed by your team again for next year, and you're going to continuously like improve on the team's atmosphere too.
By the way, go on, Wickd.
I think one problem I have with the whole thing is that Western people don't get recognized when they put in the effort as well, because there's plenty of Western people that do it, right? When we went to Korea, for example, all we did was literally eat, sleep, and play. We played 14 to 15 hours a day, every single one besides Tabs. We complained about Tabs playing 10 to 11 hours a day. We were like, you should play more, And it was 10 to 11 hours, like, you should be playing more games. And it wasn't really a problem. He played well and everything. Sadly, we lost, but that's what it is, right? But I know there's plenty of players that put in the time. Forgiven used to put in the time as well when he was playing. I know that 100%. He even played all the way till like 5 in the morning often after scrim blocks, and then waking up early to play again. Then there was scrim blocks for them, right? So there's so many Western players that are putting in the time, but everyone thinks it's only an Asian thing, and it's not really. It's just, I think it's an individual thing. Maybe there's more Asians that do it, but in general, like there's a lot of Westerns that do the same thing.
Yeah, I will say, by the way, that always was the ultimate example to me of how differently the scene works in the West, because obviously we're based on things like people like your personality, or they think you're a cool guy. It's not, as you say, based on necessarily how good. Because the ultimate example, I mean, you were in the team Amazing, was that Copenhagen Wolves squad. If people don't know, right, the main thing that used to piss Forgiven off was that Forgiven was tryharding like a motherfucker because he's just got into the LEC. It's his first chance to actually be like good, basically. Meanwhile, Youngbok, who at the time was actually pretty popular because he was always really good in interviews and seems like a cool guy, doesn't he? Well, he was the top laner. I mean, I think Forgiven told me he was stuck in fucking Diamond or something like that in solo queue, and like just obviously wasn't putting in the hours. And so to Forgiven, it actually felt like you get fucked for that, because it's like you get more annoyed because you're putting in loads of effort individually, but you know a teammate's sort of like bottlenecking how good the team can be. But because he's a cool guy, he in some ways almost gets rewarded for not doing the practice, and you look like the asshole because it's making you getting mad. So that's an extreme version. A lot of teams obviously aren't like that. But what I want to ask basically is is it as simple as this? Because obviously on an individual basis as a team, like if I was like Cloud9, for example, and I want to avoid this problem, I don't have to level the whole scene up. I could, for example, make this like a really big quality of how I recruit. Like I don't just recruit because you're a good player. I recruit because, look, we're going to go really hard next year. We're going to do like loads of boot camps and extra hours. So I'm getting people that I know of like a good track record of work. Like Wickd says they actually enjoy it. Like that's another, I think that is a really underestimated element, by the way. It's one thing to sort of bully someone and tell them you've got to do it this much because, you know, the fucking LPL teams do it. If you're someone like Froggen, where you actually, as for real, in the off season would just do it for fun, like you would just do 10-hour streaming sessions just for the off season, no one's even telling you to. A player like that's way more likely to be able to do it, obviously, because they sort of like playing the game that much anyway. What I was going to ask you is this though: would that actually work? Like, do you think players? Do even players who like it like that eventually burn out? Do they go in and out with waves? Can people stick with it for years? What do you think?
I mean, obviously people don't necessarily burn out, right? Like the perfect example is XQC with streaming. He does 11 hours every single day for 4 years straight. And it's every single day I've looked at the stats, right? So, I mean, and he still does it. People don't necessarily burn out. It's just certain people do and certain people don't. And that's definitely something you could recruit based on.
No, I think the burnout aspect is overblown. I think there is some truth to it, obviously, but I do feel like that the burnout that I've experienced and I've seen in the scene is more or less like a dissonance between like how the work you put in, the results you get. Like, and somebody like when that doesn't match up anymore, it's somebody like, fuck it, I don't want to work as hard anymore, and that's when that happens.
So more like psychological burnout.
Yeah, it's a psychological burnout because you don't get what you want. So, but what I feel like we have done is like that we have inverted the scene. That's what you just talked about, right? We have inverted the scene. We're like, back in the days, we rewarded, or we talked about like people that were like really good individually, that were really pushing hard, pushing their teammates forward. They kind of had this like they kind of had the state in the scene that were like regarded as, I don't know, like really high, right, really highly. Like Forgiven was one of them, Frog was one of them. I mean, partially I was one of them for some time. Bjergsen, like that kind of work ethic, that kind of almost insanity that you bring to the scene for that very short period of time, it was regarded as like something to admire, right? Nowadays, though, like when people are kind of like implementing that kind of work ethic and really trying to push forward, they're seen as the odd one out because like the whole team is structured not in a way that is like, I would say, result friendly or esports friendly. It's more or less like HR friendly, if that's the best comparison I can come up with. Like it's more
like brand in that sense, yeah.
Yeah, it's like if I think about how HR would run esports organizations, I would like. I can see a lot of the similarities between normal companies and esports companies at this point. I don't entirely buy into it. I think there's a necessity for having some kind of sports psychology on hand, like to basically like, or psychology on hand to kind of like mingle and talk to the person about. But even that is not something that is too necessary depending on the situation, right? Like, what I think a lot of people have to just go back towards and really understand is that like, pushing the team forward and really trying as hard as possible and working as hard as possible should be the goal of every single player. That should be the goal. You should want to win the most. You should want to do the most in order to win. It shouldn't be that you're the most friendly teammate, you're the most healthy-looking guy out there to a certain extent. But that's what we've made it. We've made that a goal to a certain extent because we've continuously killed off people that were kind of like boundary on on insanity, like between genius and insanity. They were pushing those boundaries forward, and at some point they were weeded out and phased out because the scene didn't like them anymore. They spit it out because we started running like a lot of the organizations as if they were HR departments. You know, I think that's the biggest issue that I can see. You should really structure from the other way around. You should be like, hey, this is the goal we want to achieve. And then we're going to try to make that as holistically as possible. The goal shouldn't be make the process as holistically as possible and as good as possible. Make sure that the goal that we try to achieve is achieved in the best way possible. That should be the goal. And I think that's lost in a lot of ways.
One thing actually I want to ask you about Wickd is, from times in your career when you've played a lot, do you actually agree with him on the burnout topic? Because I have to say, as I said, in my own work, I've actually had times where I've worked a lot. And I actually do feel like the idea of like raw physical burnout, you know, the idea like your body's breaking down, I do feel like that almost feels like it's, I won't say it's a myth, but it's a bit overblown. Like, I feel like it's almost more like the gym. It's like the more you go, the more you can do, you know, like your body adapts to it and it doesn't become that big a deal after a while, you know. It'll seem like it if you did it the first week, just like the gym. If you went and did your full workout on week 1, you'll feel fucking wrecked, obviously. But, you know, if you could do the same workout for 10 weeks in a row, it'll just be normal eventually.
So, I mean, back in the day, we used to stream literally 10 hours every single day while practicing, right? Me, Ocelot. We even had a time where we were streaming because we wanted to boost the viewership. So one streamed 12 hours, then the other one started, then streamed 12 hours, right?
Right.
We did that continuously because then one had night schedule, one had day schedule because you could just keep going, right? And back then there wasn't hosting features. You just told everyone, yo, everyone go to that stream next. You know?
Right.
We just did that.
Manual raid, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. So, like, the thing is, I don't really believe in the burnout. I have never experienced it myself. The thing I've experienced is more so, oh, there's a new game coming out. Oh, if I try that game, then maybe I get distracted and I want to play that game more. If I don't try the game, it's no problem. I can just keep grinding League, right? So it just depends if there's any distractions with things I'd rather do. And it's not so much that, oh, I don't want to play League. I feel like I'm burned out. I feel exhausted. So I think it's personality based. Like, I have never experienced it. I played a lot. I used to play 10 hours every single day for like a year or two, maybe even more. And I had no problems with it, like absolutely none.
Did you ever feel like, I mean, you said you didn't feel any kind of burnout. Like what I'm trying to imagine is like if it has to do more with the changing surroundings than anything. Like because for me when I was playing, like I thought every team that I was on, like as soon as I was on and it kind of had these established rhythms, I didn't like that. Once that was gone, like all the stress in the world was gone. Like I was actually fine at that point. But as soon as I had to re-implement like some of those rhythms, both changing teammates, changing surroundings, changing my living conditions, I think that's when the burnout hit for me. Like that's when I was like, dude, this is fucking annoying. I don't want to go through this again, because that's a stress that I encountered. Did you ever feel that way, or?
No, I didn't feel that way. The only thing I felt is, as I said earlier, if I start playing other games, then I can't just want to play that game instead of League, right? But I also think it's something you build up. If you build up to stream 10 hours a day, then streaming 10 hours a day is not that exhausting. But if you take a break and then you're like, oh, I have to stream 10 hours, oh, it's really long. So it takes like a little bit of time to build up to it. But once you're there, I never felt a burnout if I just kept going.
Okay.
I will also say as well, like the one last thing I have on this topic is, like I alluded to, as it's, even though it sounds great to say we're going to work smarter, not harder, or whatever the fuck the catchy line people says, the question is, like, what have you invented that no one else has figured out? Because I have to say, I actually haven't. That's one thing in League I've been a little bit underwhelmed by. I haven't heard many stories of people having like genius, you know, like unorthodox training techniques and stuff. Like there were some in other games. Like for example, I know they have the practice tool, but a lot of people don't even seem to use that. Like in StarCraft, for example, they would actually make things like, if you're using the air units, for example, like the Zerg air unit, like the fucking whatever, they had a map that was just that, and you could just practice it over and over again. And all you did is that one interaction instead of like playing an actual match every time, you know. Like I've always felt like League in general, by the fact that people practice in solo queue, etc. Like practice is by default inefficient in League, unfortunately. We don't really have techniques that they have in sports where, you know, you isolate one thing and do it over and over again and can do it. So you'd have to, like, I don't think it's impossible, but you'd have to be something of a genius, I think, to come up with any solutions to these. Like, I feel like a lot of people have tried and they haven't come up with many good ones. Like, I haven't heard many good ones, put it that way.
I mean, the main problem is just the practice tool sucks, right? You don't have any opportunities. You should be able to do 5v5 practice tools. If you want to practice team fights, you could just go in and boom, team fight over and over and over again at certain levels, certain whatever.
Yes.
But currently, if you just have a practice tool that's completely useless, like, oh, go check your damage on a dummy, good job. And that's all you get, you know, that's all Riot have given to the teams. So I actually think if Riot wants players to be healthier, Riot needs to get a practice tool out that's worth it, because they are by definition making it almost impossible to be a healthy individual and practice to be the best.
I mean, but that's also not in their interest, is it? Like they actually care more about, I mean, they don't really care about you being like in the game, I guess, and you playing it. They just care about someone playing it. I think that's how we have to see it. Like, I don't think it's in their best interest to keep the players healthy. I think it's keep the players as addicted as possible, having them jump in as many solo games as possible, making sure that they are basically brand ambassadors in the game to a certain extent. Like, I think that's how I see it.
I think it is important the bigger esport grows, right? Because the thing is, if they start coming around stories with, oh, I can't practice efficiently because of Riot Games or blah, 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 and all the blame goes towards them, that's going to look extremely bad for them if a lot of pro players are unhealthy and gets injured and they complain about it, right? So it isn't their best interest because how much they care about esports, but otherwise I would agree with you.
I mean, I would say they should, but it's like, if the broadcast was disconnected and basically like the entire product was disconnected from Riot Games, I think then like it's a bit easy. It would be a bit easier for them to care about it. But what I mean with that is like basically because everything is connected to a certain extent, and they run the broadcast, they run the game, they do both like at the same time. They don't really have to care as much about like who they're portraying, who they basically marketing up to be someone that is like basically a hero to them for the broadcast, whatever it is. Like they just care about someone being there. I think, but that's maybe just my opinion. But what I want to talk about like is like it's not just a practice tool, but it's also like obviously the overall innovation when it comes to practice is usually happening within practice itself. So it's not like, I mean, because we have so little amount of tools, the only diversity in terms of approaches is happening basically in reviews and it's happening in game. And I think that's where a lot of people don't quite know about the behind the scenes innovations that are happening because they seem so minuscule, but in the grand scheme of things, they're actually pretty big. And I remember like, obviously, to begin with, how we led reviews, like in season 2, whatever it is, we basically didn't have reviews. We basically had like 5 minutes, whatever it is. We talked about the game a bit. Hey, we should have done this, we should have done that, whatever it is. Okay, well, then we had the replay system. Then we had like basic coaches implementing their strategies, whatever it is. So it became more complex, but it's more about like individually driven. And it was more like certain things were shortened in a way that everyone understood it faster. So we developed terms for the game, like shifting whatever it is, like rotating whatever it is. And then at some point, like that snowball, obviously, at some point. So we basically have more terms to basically describe easier situations. And that's basically what I think the innovation has been about so far.
Wait, you guys didn't watch replay back in the day?
I mean, season 2, I don't think I did.
Oh, we had replays in season 1. We watched replays all the time. But I was just confused by that.
One is this almost feels amazing. It's one of the things I've noticed. Like, you know what? I'll do a very, very brief tangent now. It'll be mad because I know this is definitely not like the world. Wickd's not reading books about this. He's going to be like, "What the fuck are we talking about now?" I don't have to answer. He's going to be like in school. He's going to keep his head down so like the teacher doesn't call on him because he definitely doesn't have anything on this take. Basically, right? I don't know if you know this, but throughout all of human civilization, there's a concept that ideas don't actually come out of like your physical meat brain. That isn't like where your like mind state that has ideas and imagination is. The imagination essentially they imply is some sort of like another dimension or realm, and your brain, whatever that is, like connects to it, and you can exactly. So in ancient history it's called the Akashic record, and the idea is, you know, like everything, all information that ever can or ever will exist, or all ideas just exist in this area. A lot of great authors and poets have implied with the whole thing of like the muse that, you know, they had some connection to like a source of information. Now the reason I bring this up, right, is a mad tangent, is because I mean, in the modern day, actually, the scientific way they frame it now is it's called the noosphere. It's like the idea of like this area that all these ideas exist. But basically, the reason I bring this up is I've noticed that whenever you sort of make a really good point, and you think like I haven't heard anyone else make this point, actually, it's pretty fire. Eventually, it almost feels like you didn't even need to make it, and a month later, someone else would have made the point in your circle. You'd be like, wait a minute, so I would have gotten to this topic anyway. That's a bit weird, isn't it? Because, dude, this is exactly what we were talking about. People go back on some of these literal episodes, amazing, with the whole topic that I know has been sort of one of your pet peeves that you've been talking about. I saw you even did some comments in an interview with that guy on Invaluable, where it was basically about the idea that it ties into my idea that teams are just going all the rookies and gambling that they're all going to be good. But your angle on it is that they're missing what like veterans bring to the game. And they're missing, for example, that players kind of ties in what we said about the Forgiven example. There's sometimes players where the way they're expressing that they want the team to improve and they want to like push development can actually be considered a negative by the org, and they sort of kick that guy out and think, oh, you know, he's not coachable. That's the classic term, obviously, or he's a troublemaker or whatever. But basically, what this ties into again is the idea of, do we want players to be these blank slate rookies that the coach sort of imprints his vision of the game on, or do we want the players to be part of the decision-making issue? Because here's the thing. One of the things everyone would probably say about the LCK and LPL is they're probably the best regions ever at bringing through rookies. They bring through rookies. Think of people in the modern day like fucking Carrier, where they just become like the best in the entire world at their position in year one. Like they got unbelievable talent. Even they are now reaching this point where the LCK in this new story is now going to actively look to bring back retired veteran players because they essentially don't have enough, I'm assuming, shot callers, like veteran presences, people who've been there before, know what it's like, etc., etc., etc. So it sounds like actually the space in general is starting to diagnose, like what you were sort of talking about, amazing. Like they sort of get that you need some of these players in a team.
Yeah, I mean, it's a phenomenon that I just don't understand how it even happens to be, because it's so blatantly obvious. And like, I mean, there are multiple things that we can talk about. Obviously, one thing is that, hey, we have a lot of historic reference, and it's not just esports, but it also sports related. If we look at all the championships, a lot of the championships teams in the NBA, like, I mean, obviously I'm a big NBA guy. So for me, if I look at all the NBA champions of the last, let's say even 20 years, maybe even 30 years, like we have so much historic reference in terms of who has been there before and who's then succeeded again, right? For example, like the Lakers squads of probably my favorite squads of the 2009-2010 playoffs. Like if we think about them, they had Kobe, obviously, who already won 3 titles at the time. Derek Fisher, who also won 3 titles at the time. Like that championship experience, obviously Phil Jackson being the coach, having already won 9 titles at the time before he coached those 2 teams. Like that's invaluable experience, and experience is oftentimes like referenced to as something that is like not really important, but experience means that you have lived through a certain situation, and in most cases, if you can repeat that experience, like of winning whatever it is, it means you understood the process of winning. So that experience is not just you experienced something, but you actually understood the concept of what you did. You didn't just experience; you actually understood of what you did. that's something that League of Legends over the last 2 to 3 years has eliminated, and that's something that a lot of people don't seem to really realize, that it's something that like the GMs don't quite grasp or couldn't grasp at the beginning. So they couldn't grasp like the intangibles because they're something you don't quite understand until you're confronted by them. Like I think that's the biggest issue of intangibles, because you can talk all you want about leadership, whatever it is. I could sell you like I guess a pen like I'm the Wolf of Wall Street, whatever it is. Kind of like have that like pretend a lot of things, but leadership is something you experience. Companionship is something you experience. Shot calling is something you experience. If you're not in the room, if you don't have the knowledge of a pro player, you don't know how valuable these things are. You don't know, because you have no point of reference unless you come from a sporting business, which is quite weirdly also something that I don't quite understand why, to begin with, they didn't hire more sports-related people to actually like make those hirings. The hirings were made by managers that were managers. They were managers. So they come from a management background, they come from a sports background, they come from a management background. There's a complete difference in that. If you're a sports manager, if someone that has been to pro teams across the globe, like say NBA, football, whatever it is, you will understand like how these intangibles come into play. But if you're someone that comes from a management background, you only see people as blank slates. You see them as numbers. You see them as, hey, this guy costs 90K a year. This guy costs 75K a year. This guy could potentially develop into an asset that is going to be worth 160K next year, whatever it is, so we can sell him. These kind of things. So people become more blank slates. And then you just treat them as numbers instead of actually people. And that's where that cognitive dissonance comes from, and where the rollback is now coming from, where they're like, hey, actually, we eliminate all the brains and we don't have the knowledge anymore that we need to preserve over the years. And that has been preserved through those pro players over the years. And that's something that I mean, it's the same arrogance as you talked about earlier, right? In terms of like changing the processes, it's the same thing. You're changing the process. Why do you change the process? Well, because you think you can do it better. Well, you have so much historic reference that you can fall back upon, that you shouldn't be thinking that way. You shouldn't be thinking that way, and shouldn't be that arrogant and being like, hey, I can do this better than all the pro players that have come before me and my management skills.
I think the main thing is just incompetence throughout all the times, right? The problem is that, as you said earlier, they eliminated people, right? And I think one of the worst things that actually helped this incompetence is they made it franchising, so they can't get kicked out of LEC and LCS anymore, right? Because the thing is, you even look at NA, right? Some of the NA teams that went into the Challenge Series and so on was so much better than the LCS teams at the time, right?
Sure.
And even people like Doublelift are still really good at the game. And a lot of those players could probably play in the LCS or make it and beat the teams for the LCS if there wasn't franchising, right? The problem is a lot of people have been thinking, oh my God, if you're not a winner right now, you tried for a year, you can't improve anymore. Or 2 years or whatever. You can't improve. You're stuck at that level. That's forever your level, right? We need a new rookie. But the thing is, people can continue to improve. Even after playing for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. It doesn't mean, oh, you reach your limit. You can never get any better. People have been improving throughout time. Like, just look at the Asian teams or look at Reckless. Reckless did not know how to play aggressive in the past, right? He was always somewhat passive. Then last year at Worlds, he played extremely aggressive every single laning phase and smashed everyone. People can improve and people can learn different things, even if they've been there for a long time. And that's the biggest problem the management have had. And I agree with pretty much everything you said.
I do feel like this whole area was definitely overlooked, because like I've literally seen cases. I mean, the obvious ones are people like Mythy, Soaz, where like some of them just don't even get offers, and you're like, what? Like, listen, I get it if like the number one team doesn't want to sign Mythy, right? Their logic might be, I could get Hillestad or make it, someone who can play the same role, but maybe they're actually better, and maybe it's not as much of a big deal that they don't have the experience. The problem is this, right? If you're a team like, and I mean, this was said on one of my shows, if you're a team like Astralis and you're offering Mythy like the minimum possible salary, you just don't understand what that guy brings to the team. Like, you aren't actually just signing a support player there. You're basically signing the player who, A whole bunch of players joined your team to play with, and B is basically the brains of your team. Like, as soon as you get rid of that player, you could get someone 4 times better as an individual support, but the whole team is going to be worse. I would even say you could even look at OG and you just see that. Like, it's not about whether or not Destiny or fucking Jacktroll was as good as Mythy individually. It's about the fact that they weren't the same player he was in terms of what he brought to the team. And obviously the level of, that's the other thing. We're giving examples now of like the most experienced players. So the reason I bring those up as examples is if people don't value the experience of someone like Soaz and they think it's just about being a top laner now, Well, he's got the most possible. That tells me you just don't value experience, full stop. Like, I'm not picking someone who only played for 2 years, and going, he has a bit of experience. I'm picking people who played in season 1, for fuck's sake, who have, like, insane experience. I even think as well, by the way, on some level, these GMs and coaches, they actually all claim kind of like that they do believe rookies can all be coached and be the best and all that garbage, but here's the thing, the way they don't sort of believe it is, think of Rogue and Mad Lions at this last Worlds, where they both sort of like semi-shit the bed. Like, Mad Lions didn't even get into Worlds, the main event, and obviously Rogue just didn't do anything in their group. Like, they weren't particularly like exciting or impressive, right? No one really went that hard in general, because what we all did was sort of like, well, most of them have never been to Worlds before, it's their first time. So what we're all acknowledging is that experience is really fucking important. Otherwise, logically, like, they had the skills to do it, yeah. If you look at the raw skills, of course you should have a chance to do all the things we're talking about. So I feel like people, that's why to me it does sort of tie back into almost a very cynical take on LEC, which is, I think they just do the rookie moves mainly for to save money, quite frankly. I think like if the money was the same, that's when you'd really find out if they really believed player X was better than player Y. I think the problem is they have all the reasons, like Wickd said, it. They believe the player can't improve anymore. They think of the rookie. They always, I notice, think the rookie has like the maximum potential possible, even though that can't be true for everyone. And then more importantly, if that player also is like half as much to sign, you've got another reason to do it, haven't you? Like, even the cynical aspect tells you, give it a go. It's just financially worth it. No, I think it's hard to escape this trap, though. It's going to be really hard. I don't know how we're going to do it.
I think one perfect example is even Vander, right? Look at this guy. He played since 2011, so pretty much since the beginning almost. And there was a period of time where he went into an academy team for Rogue because he wasn't being picked up, right? I think it was even a small period of time where he wasn't even on a team.
He was in Schalke. He was a Schalke in academy, but he was in the challenger scene, and he was on Rogue Academy. So he was on two. He was actually on Schalke after he made. Didn't he go to Schalke after he made top?
Yeah, that was after Worlds. Yeah,
after top 4 Worlds.
Yeah. And then instantly he goes to Misfits and they're dominating, right? He is literally still one of the best players.
Yes,
and he's older right now. He's 27, right? It's not crazy old or anything, but for the league scene, people are like, oh my god, he's 24, he's gonna retire right now, it's over.
True.
So pretty much it's like, this guy's extremely fucking good. He's continuously improving and he's continuously getting better. And it just proves the entire point, I think.
Go on.
It doesn't even have to be an individual player. It's just like about the whole concept that you just talked about, right? Like, they can still improve. Like, it's like veterans have a baseline established, right? That's the baseline. Like, I think that's how people have to like kind of change their thinking. It's like, when it comes to rookies, you always try to like, obviously, partly in most cases they're evaluated for the potential, but rarely for the baseline. Like, to a certain extent they are, but it's mostly for their potential.
Yes.
When it comes to veterans, however, they're which should be the case. You should evaluate them for the baseline. You should be evaluating them. Hey, this is where they are right now, and then think about, hey, what has been the potential so far in terms of like the years they've played. Like, have they gone terrible years, have they got good years? So what can we do to increase that upside again? What can we do to get them back there again? So Misfits has done, and that's, I mean, I have to congratulate them. Is basically like they have established a system in which Thunder works, which is basically like trust from his teammates, trust from his coaches, then good sports psychology around, and then a GM that seems to know what he's doing in Difficile. So like there's a system built around it. So how do you get players to get to that level again? Well, you build the same systems that you have built beforehand. Why don't you do the same thing for veterans that have succeeded in the past, that you want to do, proclaim you want to do for rookies? Where is the difference? Well, the difference is that you think they can get away with paying less money. And that's, I mean, we can be less cynical about it, but that's basically it. It's about less resources having to be invested, and that's the only reason why you're not doing it. There's no other reason.
I think there's one more reason, actually. I think the community have been very, very strict on, NA didn't win this year, we should replace the players and get new people all the time, right? Even if the veterans were much better at the time. So I think the community have actually had an impact as well, because, yeah, I know GMs shouldn't care about the community says, they should only care about winning and blah, blah, blah. But
I believe it more to be related to too long of a prep time making you think that you're already good. And this may sound really weird, but it's like, if you have a prep time of like, say, 2 to 3 weeks, right? Like, you come into the split and you're like, okay, I'm going to take it slow. We're going to try to like just build up in the beginning, like figure out new things. Like, you're not in the driver's seat at that point. You're someone that is spectating. You're someone that is taking in influence from other teams and trying to get better. The teams that have had a longer prep time, let's say 1.5 months or a month, whatever it is, they're already coming in very well prepared. It's obviously going to prepare them to a couple of wins, but they're given a lot of the info that they have accumulated over that month to the other teams by default, by just existing.
Yes.
So the teams that have more veterancy and more understanding, I mean, just general capabilities of understanding, which is basically like the cerebral aspect of the game, are going to figure out these things very, very early, understand, okay, this is what this team is made of, and we're going to try to counter this, or we're going to try to get to that level, and they're going to try to adapt. So the team that is on top of the beginning actually has the harder task of staying ahead, whereas the other teams just have to copy and try to make it better. And I think that's actually easier to figure out from an outside perspective than someone that's within the process and has to continuously get better and make sure that the process stays on a good level. I think that's way harder.
I think it also ties into a bit, right, that some teams goes to MSI, goes to tournaments and other things, so they actually start practicing much, much later for the entire thing. And then once they get in there, they have a bad start. And one thing that I also want to mention is often when you start practicing, the practice is not as good because you're not in stage games, so people might play different. Right. And the practice might be really bad. Like in the past, for example, we had scrims where we won every single game. We talked about that before as well. We won every single game in 10 minutes and we didn't learn how to play the game. So once we actually got to stage, we just lost all the time for the first 4 games, but we ended up winning the entire season, right? So the practice before any state games is much less valuable because you don't actually know if it's going to work in on the stage.
I will say one thing I thought you actually made a very shrewd point about there, amazing, is people have to almost think of the split, even though it sounds like a weird analogy, like a group project. And the idea is, like, just because you're the first person to do well, like you did your part of it in this case, if you're the team leading the league, essentially, as you say, if you're better than the other teams and for good reason with how you've practiced and things you've innovated, you are then in the process of playing them over and over again, teaching them to potentially, keyword potentially, figure out the things that you've figured out. You're sort of teaching them to do it. So the problem in this scenario is, at the end of the split, as it were, the teams that actually know how to practice and practice against each other and learn, they're essentially all teaching each other. It's just almost like some mad musical chairs of like, what week is the finals on? Because whatever week the finals on will actually determine who wins. It's why I've always thought in League, people do overvalue the idea that you can look at like one tournament result and decide like how good the player was that year. It's like, mate, it depends when the tournament was. Like, because I noticed the same phenomenon, by the way, happens in all the other games I've followed, Dota, CSGO. Like, the worst time ever to be the best team in the world is in like fucking March, because obviously the big world championship is like at best, like, let's say like fucking October or something, you know, normally. So it's like the odds that you stay that good that long are really, really hard. And there's also the other factor as well. If you look at some of these teams, like the Misfits one's a good example because they just kept the same lineup, didn't they? Other people were chopping and changing. Or what they did is they took a mid-table team, kept the exact same lineup. They knew some of them were rookies as well, so they knew they might automatically get better without anything even changing. And because we kept the same lineup, we don't start over again. We haven't reset ourselves. We hopefully start where we were and then we add on to it. Whereas you saw, obviously, like SK is the extreme example. They're completely changing up the team. They are starting at zero. In fact, you could even say they were starting to be minus numbers if you think about the fact that people were playing roles they've never played before. I think that's a factor as well. That's one of the reasons why I always think it is weird to me that people don't look at the lesson of some of the really big orgs. Like the most successful orgs in LCS and LEC, most of them do have players who know how to peak. Like, they really know it doesn't actually matter if you're the best in week 2 of the split. Like, they might in interviews still get bothered and, you know, it might look worrying if you lose 4 games in a row. But somehow these players and coaches and orgs, they sort of get that, like, you can sort of hit a panic button in, like, week 7 or something, right? You can sort of, like, say, right, we've got to really get our shit together now. And if we go really hard for 2 weeks, by the playoffs comes, we'll be good enough and we can still win. Like, that's one area that ties back into the experience thing. I feel like that's the big difference between rookies and veterans. The rookie does think you have to win every single game and you go 100%, you know, at every match. The veteran sort of knows when you have to turn it on.
Yeah, no, that's what it is. Like, I mean, there's even if I think about it, like the SCS finals that I've played, or the LCS like just games that I've played so far. Like, I think with Schalke we were like third. We're third. We ended up being second. With Origin, one split, we ended up 4th and we ended up 2nd again. So that's something that people don't quite understand, is that peaking stuff is actually quite real. And we have historic reference from sports, obviously, that the seeding doesn't quite matter, because in the end, you still probably have to play every team unless, you probably still have to play like actually the same teams in most cases. Like, you may have to play one more team that is maybe a tad better than you in terms of the seeding, but it's still going to be the same team that you're going to have to face if you're first place, right? They're going to make it there, and that's what it is. So I think that's what people disregard, that, like, again, end of the season success to me defines like what a player is about. And anyone that's claiming differently is honestly just attacking what the game. Like, I mean, honestly, I don't want to sound like someone that's like I want to deal in absolutes. I'm not a Sith, but like I think the idea is like you're attacking merit and you're attacking things that should be intrinsic to the game, which is basic success. Like you want to succeed, you want to be the best team, you want to be the best player, whatever it is. Well, you got to prove it, and you got to prove it in playoffs. Like the regular season doesn't matter. Like it matters that you get to playoffs and you're going to perform there. And I think that's, again, like that ties back into the whole rookie versus veteran debate, is that like what a lot of GMs do, and that's something I'm trying to understand, is also that they over-evaluate like regular season success. They over-evaluate like teams that were good in the beginning. They over-evaluate individuals that have shown some promise in the regular season but couldn't carry that team to playoffs. Well, dude, if you're good enough, and I think maybe that era is kind of ending, but I think it still has some merit because Wonder is kind of like to a certain extent proving that experience, is that like if you're good enough in terms of an individual player, well, at some point you're going to be able to transcend. And if you're able to transcend, that means you're going to make other people better. You're going to be able to shot call. You're going to be able to talk about the game more, problem solve. And that's why we have the best players continuously winning certain things, because they are able to do that. And that's, again, a disregard that a lot of GMs have for that, like kind of intangibles that are there, because you're not evaluating. You're evaluating regular season success, which is akin to solo queue, more akin to solo queue than anything else, instead of like really thinking about playoff success. And I think that's where the cognitive dissonance between, like, at least like for me to a great extent actually comes from, where I'm like, okay, so what exactly are you evaluating? Regular season, interesting. What matters to you? What matters to you? Well, it matters to you to look good. Is that what it is? No, it should matter to you that you're winning and you're going to be the best team at the end of the split, or one of the best teams of the split. And I think that's what a lot of teams don't pursue or want to pursue or don't care about anymore. I think they just don't care about it anymore.
I also think one thing we have to keep in mind is how absolutely useless the LCS season is, right? It's like a year long, and literally 8 teams are going to make it to playoffs. So it's like, literally, this season doesn't even matter. As long as you can beat CLG and Golden Guardians, you're good to go. That's your benchmark. You need to be able to beat Golden Guardians and CLG. CLG had been a clusterfuck. You saw the coaching. You saw the sponsored Bud Light video they made. Like, this all could have been a clusterfuck this season, right? So, I mean, beating that is not that difficult. So, the only thing that's amazing is you just got to be able to win playoffs. That's it. You can be 8th, you can be 7th. That's fine. And all the teams will have the chance to do it at playoffs.
Oh, by the way, one other topic, because I just saw this on Twitter, actually, I just remembered about it, I thought it was an interesting one, was this thing that Grabs said, where basically the new champion, Akshan, is going to be, even though it will be enabled for Worlds, the LEC teams voted to not have it enabled in playoffs of LEC. The logic being, like, there might be bugs because it's a brand new champion, you know, they don't want to deal with it. Like, obviously, if anyone's been watching LEC the last few weeks, there's been a few times where they've had to do these pauses and, like, a fucking bunch of, like, as usual, like, you know, interactions that fuck up the game, and then you have to pause, or rather, Upset pauses the game, you know, fucking, whatever. Mate, he does, mate, Upset does seem like he'd pause the game if, like, you fucking breathed out too hard, like, oh wait, I have to catch my breath, like, wait a second, like, wait, I haven't got my oxygen right now, start again, like, mate, it's the middle of a team fight, like, fucking do it at the end of the game or something. What's this? But anyway, the point was this, right? What Grabs was annoyed by was the idea that even though, yes, I understand the bugs could exist in the LEC playoffs that might not exist at Worlds, his problem is it kind of feeds into what people's sentiment is about LEC, which is, even though LEC is considered, like, you know, a region that's gotten better and better the last few years, the perception of, like, Europeans is that we think we have our own way of playing the game, and we're just going to do that no matter what, and we're not going to try and, like, copy LCK and, you know, LPL, like, we're just going to do our shit. So in line with that, basically the implication is if nobody plays against Akshan in the LEC playoffs, people are going to go to Worlds, the teams that qualify, and potentially have never played in an official game against this champion. What do you think about that? It's a pretty open-ended question. Like I say, I can see the context on either side. What do you think about this amazing? Like, is it good? Is it bad? Where did you come down if you hear this story?
I mean, I would probably advocate either it's globally banned for the playoffs, or it's simply not banned at all. Like, I think those are the two options. I don't think banning it for one playoffs in one part of the world makes any kind of sense. Like, then you're just giving others competitive advantages, and I think that's where I would lie. Like, I think exposure to different things is always good. Like, whatever it is, like, it can be, like, obviously a different champion, a different playstyle, I guess. But it's exposure that is necessary. I think that's what it is. It's exposure that is necessary. So if anyone has more exposure to something, well, they're going to be in a better spot because they can accumulate experience against a certain strategy or champion in that regard.
So I honestly don't really think it matters that much because they're going to have a lot of time to practice Worlds anyways. But in the name of competitive integrity, which Riot loves to use themselves, I think it is important to have it global, right? I don't care if he's banned, I don't care if he's open, but just have it even for everyone. You can't have some rules for one region and then different rules for another region. It just seems weird. So I don't think it matters. I don't think it's going to have an impact at all. But I still think just by the small chance that it could have an impact, it should be the same for everyone.
Even though, like, look, we've had discussions before about the idea, you know, like of a still meta and like how it lets things develop. Like, I'm not going to make that case again, but I will say the one thing I've always really disliked in League is like the way they sometimes change patches going into Worlds. I think it's crazy the impact it has on people's careers. Like, I mean, funny enough, I'll use the example actually because the most famous season to me for this Amazing is the one where your Origin team made it to top 4. If people don't remember, at the end of the summer split was when obviously Gangplank became super fucking powerful. By the way, it just so happened Soaz was low-key like the best fucking player on that in the West, easily. So they had Gangplank came along, and then when we get to Worlds, it was the one where it was just about what side of the map you're on because everyone had all those fucking bans. You had to do like the fucking Darius ban, Mordekaiser. There might have been a third one I'm forgetting. Like there was a whole bunch of you remember where it's like if you didn't ban these champions, basically, it was just broken. Like you saw the 1 or 2 times people tried using those champions. Were just unbelievable. So it made the tournament not really as much about who's the best at League of Legends, who's the best of the sort of like really weird version where we almost have like a gentleman's agreement. We can't play these 3 champions. Like I've always found that's a bit too extreme for me. I don't mind if one champion's OP or something, you know, how do you deal with it? But like when you do that, like the problem is it makes one year too different to the others to me.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the year, you should be able to have figured out what you want the meta to be like. I think that's what Riot's downfall in a lot of ways is that I think they sometimes have an idea and they get too much of a community pushback at some point. And they're like, oh, we're going to reverse some of these ideas. And then you end up in situations where like you have rash decision making within a short time period and suddenly the game changes completely. Like I remember at Season 5 Worlds, actually before that, even at playoffs, Gangplank died. And that was the weirdest thing about all things is that Gangplank died, and we had to train on the live patch because the TR patch was not updated yet.
Ah, right. I see what you mean.
So GP died, and you couldn't select them in solo queue games. Nor could you couldn't scrim on him.
Oh, it was disabled. Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. Yes,
he died, so we couldn't practice with him, which was quite weird. So Soaz had to kind of like figure out what to do with him, and kind of had to spam. I don't know what did he have to spam. I think he had to spam like an old patch word. I don't quite remember what he had to do to practice him, but he was the only one that did some of that. Everyone else just sucked at it because they didn't put in the work.
That's a pretty clever idea, though. Go and get an old patch. Like that's pretty legit. I didn't know Soaz was actually like a thinker on that level. Now, it made it sound like he's just like getting the salt shaker. Now, this is Gangplank. This is me moving backwards, like behind the sauce bottle. That's the turret. Like, I didn't know he was actually putting in work. Legit respect.
I'm pretty sure he did. I could be lying. You know, I could make him look better.
That sounds plausible. Yeah.
But I think he did because he was the only one that actually kind of mastered the barrel combo, which I think I don't know if he did it. If he did it on TR, I don't know where he did it. But he did in some kind of isolated instance, and I don't quite remember when. Maybe he had some games on him before he got disabled, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. But it's, I think we should really like advocate more, and I think maybe that's I guess my take on that whole thing is that we should advocate more for stability, like 1 month prior to, let's say, playoffs or 1 month prior to Worlds. Like I think maybe that kind of stability has to be there, and that should kind of be there. That you have like 2 months or 3 months of a stale patch. We're like, oh, that's what we're going to figure out. And if there's something we really, really need to address, we can address it. But I think teams having the ability to figure things out really brings out the beauty in the game. Because to me, the beauty in the game is not like, being the best at something new, because that just means you're spamming it to begin with and you're one of the first ones adopted. Like it's rather just being great at something established, because that really takes not just hard work. Obviously, it takes a lot of like cerebral ability. You just have to understand the situation. You have to understand the counter picks, whatever it is, to really master that whole patch. And I think that's what like Riot has really moved away from over the years, and it seems to be crashing down on them in a lot of ways, where people are complaining now more about the patches than they have ever done in the past, to my estimation, because the rapid changes actually make it so. Again, and that ties back to the, I guess, rookie veteran discussion, is that like you basically tell people spam the game on every patch and do it continuously. So that's not the message I would want to send for a competitive game, at least. I would want to send the message, hey, we're going to change a couple of things up, but then we're going to have established meta at the end of the year, and that's what we're going to run with. Having it more akin to sports rather than like a random-ass mobile game. That's how it feels like.
Dude, I remember the Gangplank change that makes me depressed. So basically what happened is we were playing the Challengers at the time, playoffs, right? And we were playing against Wunder's team, and we were actually the better team at the time, right? We were seen as the better team. Then none of us had seen Gangplank, none of us had practiced Gangplank. He'd never played Gangplank before, he said. And in the last game, after 1-1, he picked Gangplank. And the champ is just so broken that we just get destroyed by Gangplank alone, and we lose the entire series, and we get kicked out, and we don't get the chance to go to LEC or LCS at the time, right? So I hate that Gangplank thing. There's the only time they ever did it, and they've never done it again. And I think they learned from that mistake. It sucks that it was the cost of other people. But I think Riot is slowly getting better at this, and I think they have been making smaller changes around Worlds. I think one problem is actually the patches are changing when Worlds is running, right? So you have different patches that people practice on the solo queue. I don't like that aspect. I'd actually like just a month where there's no patches maybe when Worlds is running, so everybody's playing on the same patch and can practice properly. I think that's the only thing they need to learn, because they have learned from not making massive changes or killing a champion so nobody can practice it and then suddenly releasing it for the games. I think they learned that.
I mean, I think the messaging should just change. Maybe either they change like how, as you said, the patching should be run around words, or they just change messaging, because it's quite clear that a lot of the changes that are being made are not necessarily with the intention of being competitively, like having competitive integrity. It's rather about like doing something to benefit the main player base. I mean, there's no shame in that. I understand it. It's, again, like you want to make a lot of money. You want to make sure that the player base is engaged, but then just be honest around the messaging. I think that's, especially on words, that's something I've kind of missed, where they're like, yeah, we do these changes because of XYZ in solo queue. He's been running wild in bronze elo. Like, let's just be real about it. You can just say it. It's okay. Like, we don't have to argue about this. But that's like the kind of like pretend situation that I think we're finding ourselves in a lot of ways, where like Riot isn't quite open and honest about their intentions. And I wish they were better. I think that's maybe the thing that I wish the most, that they're better at it, because then a lot of pro players could deal with that situation a bit more. And I think that's overall, like, I wish that was the messaging around, that they're like, hey, we don't patch for the competitive scene. We do it for the regular player base, and we try to make it as competitively integrated as possible. You know, that's maybe they should just say that. Come out and say that. I think that's what I wish they would do.
By the way, one piece of news I saw was that, like, officially Riot announced that they're going to, like, tweak the ERLs, and one tweak they're going to make is they're going to combine the Baltic League with the Polish League, the Ultraliga, and then they're going to make, this one's obvious, they're going to make the Dutch and Belgium League into a Benelux League. If people don't know, like, that region's always been combined in esports historically anyway. It's the equivalent of doing, like, the Nordic region for the countries from there, right? One thing I thought about this is, I don't think a lot of people have been and looked at the ERL. You can always tell who actually is following those scenes and who, like, only knows from interviews and stuff. Because here's the thing, if you go back a few years ago, yeah, most of the ERLs were like all these rookies and names you haven't seen, or people haven't made it yet, or they were in LEC for like a week, you know, and they were the sob that didn't get the proper chance. Dude, if you go and look now, like I saw this with the LFL when I was starting to watch it, this split, because I was trying to watch the Carmine Corp team. Mate, the amount of talent in the top ERLs is crazy. Like, if it's basically, it shows why it is the real solution to what NA wished it was doing with Academy, but isn't. Because, like, all the ERLs at the top level now are either, like, good rookies, people who haven't made it yet, or they are people who are, like the LFL, for example, is tons of people who've been in LEC. It's tons of players who were like a top laner, a mid laner, like in LEC 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So either they're the ones that are going to potentially earn their way back, or there's actually veterans even in that league that help players when they're on the come up. You know, you don't have to get to LEC to actually get some experience. Like, dude, I actually think the ERLs are amazing now. I thought that I will admit, because I'm in general not a fan of like geolocation, the way you do it in Overwatch, etc. Like, I was never a big fan of that. I thought that was like some old school shit. But actually growing the smaller scenes, like, I think it's been legit so far. Like, it looks like they have leveled up year on year on year. What do you think about this, Amazing? I
mean, they behave more like they behave as if it was like season 4, season 5, season 6 SCS. I think that's the main difference. Where they, like, obviously they're unfranchised, right? Like, I think they aren't. Yeah, they aren't. Mm. They're unfranchised. At least all the RL leagues are not franchised. So they are in a peculiar spot where they actually have to try to win in order to stay in the scene. And anyone that wants to move back to LCS obviously has an incentive, or LEC has an incentive to basically perform as well as possible. But it's the EU Masters incentive is high, then obviously the individual incentive to win the split is high, then the exposure you get through winning is obviously there. So there are a lot of incentives to actually perform as well as possible, and they don't shy away from implementing pieces that they think are good. And it's veteran players, but it's also just players that seem to have something in them that makes them want to be competitive. And I think that's what the French scene especially has kind of like really elevated, is that this will to compete. And we see this with LDSC. I think Dan, for example, like I worked with him, that guy, true competitor to me. I obviously saw us as a coach that helps a ton too. But even people like Ica have found their place to a certain extent to actually like make a living and make something out of themselves, even after their like not disastrous, but like subpar LCS split. So it is that they understand experience, but I think they do it partially out of, I don't want to say goodwill, but it's more like they do it because these are the best representatives or like potential candidates for the spaces. And the way that they operate is just different to how the LCS and LEC is operating, where they think more about, hey, we can develop this guy long term, but the ERLs want to win now, and I think that's where the main difference lies in terms of like the hiring process.
I think a really big thing is, and I'm just gonna say it, the public was a whiny bunch of bitches, right? And the thing is,
all right,
and same with NA, when a lot of LCS players in NA was going to academy or to the academy tournament or whatever, the second tournament, it's like, oh, we should just get rid of these players. We don't want the pro players anymore. We want new talent. We need new talent to win and so on. No, you don't need that. You need the best of the best to practice. And then if new talent can make against the best, that's how you make even better players, right? And if you look at the ERLs, what I love about the ERLs is you have everyone competing with everyone. You have the talent, you have the veterans, you have Woolite, you have Memento, you have, Ica, as you talked about earlier. You have so many veterans that are competing against all the talent, right, that are coming in, all the rookies. And if the rookies does better, well, they're going to get picked up. But if the veterans does better, they get picked back up into the LEC, right? As we talked about earlier, we talked about Vander. He went down for a little bit, and now he's back in one of the best teams in the LEC, and he's actually showing the quality of a player he is.
It's the approach that is really important to me. Like that, when you join the REL League team, you actually know what you have to do, and that's just like you just have to be as good as possible. You have to be winning. So in that sense, I feel like that they are more relying on and trying to operate under the pretense of merit rather than any other like franchise league. That's just what it is. The franchise leagues, the more I think about it and the more I really see like the effect it has on people, the more I hate the entire process. Like I genuinely hate it because no one has the incentive like to actually try as hard as possible. Everyone just has to pretend they try as hard as possible. And I think that's where I feel like I guess my hate is coming from, because it feels like that it's become more of a marketing game than it becomes anything else. And a lot of the players that have basically been able to network and market themselves towards the GMs and whatever have been the ones succeeding. And it's not the ones that have necessarily been the best at certain points. Like obviously Vander going to Worlds, and then he went second place with Schalke, and then he had to go back into an academy team for Rogue he was playing behind Wickd, and then which is okay because Wickd went to Worlds. But then you look at the other teams that were like competing with the supports. Like ErikHillestad was the only one that placed above him in the LCS, right, at that time, and yet he had to compete against he had to get Vulnerable's place into academy. Like, how does that happen? How does it happen with Kjarnan and Wickd to be separated that kind of way and barely finding a spot after they get top 4 at Worlds? How does that happen? And that would never fly in REL. If you make it to first, second, or third in REL, I do believe that you're going to have a fine spot in one of the top teams again, in most cases, simply because they value merit over anything else, over the marketing aspect, because they have to. Like, if you want to make it to EU Masters, you have to be the best team possible, and that's the most amount of exposure that you're going to get on a personal level, like as a player as well as a team. So, message is fuck franchising. I wish we just go back to this entire circuit of, man, develop players if you want to, but do this under the risk of fucking losing it all. Like that should be it. like we have this in soccer. Schalke just made it out of like the first league. They're gone now.
Yeah.
They're in the second league now. They made bad bets. Well, you should be punished for making bad bets. As dumb as it sounds. Like it doesn't matter what kind of like company or what kind of like what kind of team you are. If you make bad bets, well, you should fucking be paying for it. And it would do the scene a lot better because that would really weed out the bad sheep. And the bad sheep could be anyone from pretending to be a good GM to pretending to be a helpful coach, pretending like these pretentious personalities that are really trying to be helpful under the guise of self-preservation. And I think that's the essence of the issue, is that like that's been promoted actively 24/7 instead of promoting actively promoting people that are really good at the game. Like, why don't you just do that? Why don't you let the game really weed itself out, really phase itself out? Like, if players are good, well, then they're good. And if they're bad, they're bad.
I also think there's two problems with it. The one problem is players don't have a way to prove themselves, right? Right now, you can't actually get into LEC without butting up with people. There's only the orcs that's in it, and you can't get in no matter what you do unless you're butting up with an orc, right? And if they want you. That's the only way you can make it. And the second problem I see is the people making all the decisions, what qualifications do they have? Like a lot of the coaches you talked about earlier have been incompetent. A lot of them were even only general managers and wasn't even a real coach, right? Again, not really competent for the job. So when they made franchising, most of the people that had the decision power had no idea what to do. They had no experience. They didn't know anything about it. They weren't even a coach beforehand. They just maybe just got into being a coach and they're like, oh, I need to make decisions. Which players do I want? So it could fuck over a lot of players' careers as well, right? Even if they're really good, they can't get into a team.
Sure. I mean, I definitely think that a lot of the players that like we complain about on these shows, like how do they not get a chance? Or like if they're a veteran, someone like Soaz, why do they not get a spot? If you want to make the players like leaders, an obvious example, like people would have gambled on these players before this if relegation still existed. Like nobody's just going to say, I'm just going to take all these rookies and potentially blow my entire spot, lose all the money in VC I've got, like in terms of the future. Like I'm not going to get any more investment if I'm not in the top division. You would just take one of those players. You'd sort of like swallow your pride. Probably the best example, I found this crazy. When I had Jizuki on Summoning Insight, I think it was last week. Yeah, I think it was last week, right? He actually said there, he just dropped it in as like a side detail. He didn't think it was a big deal. Dude, he got 0 offers from LEC after Vitality. 0. Not a single team in the entire league thought Jizuki is a fucking player worth that. That is mental. That can't be real. Like, when that happens, there's some sort of a fundamental breakdown has happened with the people who are the GMs and the coaches. Because I get it, if the best team doesn't want him, that's one thing. But the idea, like, even the worst team, even like SK doesn't want Jizuki. Like, give me a break. This guy's fucking sick at the game. Like, he's a very specialised player, kind of like a leader. That's why I always draw the comparison. But you can definitely win with this guy. Like, look how good he is. But the problem is, if people don't know, he has the reputation that still follows him around of like, oh, he's a bit BM and toxic and solo queue. And that, I don't know what that would have to do with like in the LEC, but that stuff like that does matter to people, I've noticed. Like that still can get you blacklisted if the perception is you're toxic to the players that are currently in the team.
I mean, I think one of the best examples we can even give is from this season LEC, right? We talked about how good the ERLs are, how much talent is in the ERLs. And then we can go back to what happened with Jesses and SK, right? And you're just like, who's making the decisions in SK and what happened, right? It just shows a lot of problems in the entire scene right now in that regard.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think even Ambition talked about it quite some time ago. Like, I mean, I actually fished out like his quotes on it, and I hope the translations are fair because that's been a couple of years ago. And he said, no one accepted me because they said I was old at the time. I was 27, 26. Was it 27, 27? How old is that age? Or really, how would they know my skill? Were they challengers? What did they even know? They didn't even know how to read the game, right? Who's assessing whom? Who's evaluating whom? And I think that goes back what you said, Wickd, right? Like, they don't have the qualifications for it because, like, the qualifications are being good at the game to a certain extent, right? You obviously have to be able to read the game, but to a great extent, it's being good at the game and being good at the professional game. So once you're at that point, you understand how to be good at the professional game. You can judge other players if they're good or not, like, and that's something that has gone missing, where that evaluation process has been perverted, where it's more about, I mean, I talked about this a bit already, but like, the evaluation process is not based upon something that is palpable. It's not based on something that is real, if that makes sense. It's more or less an inkling. It's more or less a feeling that you have towards a person more so than anything else. And I think that's where like the disconnect comes from, where it's not based on reality. It's just like, I feel this player is not going to be good for our team. And that's crazy to me. That feels crazy to me.
Right, speaking of bad bets that need to be weeded out and punished, nice segue there. I'll just do my last bet of the segment. A really nice pick or a one you want to highlight for people?
I mean, if I had to do any bets, so these are going to be very unlikely to win, right? But the thing is, XL's odds are always amazing. So you have XL at 4.6 odds against Rogue, and you have XL at 4 odds against G2, right? So if I had to choose one team to actually bet on, it would be XL. It would be a smaller amount, but it'd be like, they can actually win these games. They have shown that they're good, but they're very inconsistent, right? So that's probably the best one because the odds are so good. But besides that, I think it's much easier to just bet live and actually see the team comps.
Okay.
That's one way to print money, actually. You just bet on XL against G2. I mean, I would take that bet. I would personally take that bet.
It's pretty
like
spicy.
a Fox is really good, I think. I think it's actually really good.
Well, let me ask you this in a minute. What about this? Do you actually think there is a game of the week? Is there a game that you think stands out and should be the marquee game? What would you pick?
That is a good question. I think Misfits Fnatic. I mean, Misfits Fnatic could be really interesting. I mean, I'm partially biased or forced to be biased, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
But it's also that it determines a lot about Misfits, because like